Standing Committee on Finance. The committee is meeting today to discuss committee business. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you're aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Today's meeting is also taking place in a webinar format. Webinars are for public committee meetings and are available only to members, their staff, and witnesses. Members enter immediately as active participants. All functionalities for the active participants remain the same. Staff will be non-active participants and can therefore only view the meeting in gallery view. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen are not permitted. Given the ongoing pandemic situation in light of the recommendations from health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19, 2021 to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain 2 meter physical distancing, must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room, and it's highly recommended that the mask be worn at all times, including when seated. Must maintain a proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizer at the room entrance. As a chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting and thank members in advance for their cooperation. So just to everybody, to ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline just a few things. Of course, interpretation is available at the bottom of your screens in English or French, and a reminder just to make all comments be addressed through the chair. With regard to speaking lists, the committee clerk and I will do our very best to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. I do see. Yep. Okay, I see Mr. Beach's hand up, and I guess Mr. Poliev is also next on the list.
Yeah,
so.
Actually, I just informed the clerk before Mr. Beach. So the order seems to have been reversed.
Well, Mr. Poliev, I'd seen Mr. Beach's hand up already. So I
you
did.
just saw it now, though. I saw.
No, I'd seen Mr. Beach's hand up.
Quite an achievement.
No, yeah.
That
so
you managed to. You must have a time machine.
I did see Mr. Beach's hand up. So
Right.
Mr. Beach and then Mr. Poliev. Yes, Mr. Beach. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've had my hand up for 40 minutes. It's been quite exhausting. So thank you for recognizing me. I'll put it down now that I have the floor. Mr. Chair, I would like to move the following motion with regard.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Yes, I wanted to just talk about the confusion that you caused at the previous meetings, and that seems to have spilled over into this one regarding the order of exchanges in committee, where you mistakenly came under the impression that the way that questions and answers work is that the member asks a question and then the witness then gives an interminable speech for the rest of the time left. Now, that is not how the rules work, and as a result, today now we see more confusion where you're recognizing someone who is behind me on the list, and the member's now claiming he had his hand up for 40 minutes. Of course, we weren't meeting for 40 minutes, so that's impossible. So these kinds of games are going to cause more and more disorder as the meeting goes on, and potentially make it possible for any of Mr. Beach's or anyone else's motions to get adopted. That unfortunately is the case, and it is going to. It is unfortunate that you are obstructing the committee's work in this way. We all obviously have important work and planning to do for Canadians, but that can't be done if you continue to play these kinds of games, Mr. Chair. I've been on this committee now since 2017. We did not have these problems under the previous chair. He was a Liberal, a proud, long-standing Liberal former cabinet minister with whom I had many disagreements. But he did not play games in the manner that we're now seeing. And what it is causing is that it's causing a distraction from the work that we need to do today and the work that we need to do going forward. And so I suspect that it will continue to cause these same problems if we don't get them solved. And that will prevent us from getting programming motions passed and or achieving anything else that we desperately need to achieve in these times, Mr. Chair. As you know, we have a lot of issues to address. We are the Finance Committee at a time of where inflation is at a generational high, when housing prices have increased more than at any time in recorded history, and when our economy sits on the precipice of a debt crisis.
Mr. Polyev.
And so what we need to do is get back to, frankly, getting back to the way the committee functions. And unfortunately, you don't seem to want to do that. I mean, you're causing a lot of disruption here. We could be doing valuable work.
Mr. Polyev,
So
I'll speak to your point of order. I'll speak to Mr. Polyev and to members. I'll speak to your point of order.
I'm not.
Mr. Polyev, you're done. Yes. So, Mr. Polyev, listen. The committee in our first meeting adopted routine motions. Those routine motions, I would request that you go and read through those routine motions again. And in those routine motions, we set up for question and answer time. There was an allotment of, be it the 6 minutes or 5 minutes or how it was broken down. I've been more than fair, actually, in terms of allowing for extra time beyond that time with members. If members would like to change those routine motions and how we do it in terms of allowing for questions and for answers, that could be done. That's up to the members, up to the committee. But routine motions were passed, Mr. Polyev, so we're going to move on. And as far as Mr. Beach, his hand was up from the get-go of this meeting, and I've recognized you as you've stated that you wanted to speak also, and you're up right after Mr. Beach. So we'll hear now from Mr. Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, members, and to my member opposite, I agree with him in that.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I thought Madame Chatel had a point of order. Just
Yeah, we'd like to hear that too.
I was questioning whether that was point of order. That was my point of order. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Beach.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we all want there to be fairness, and we all want to get on with the good work that we're here to do for Canadians. I agree with that point of Mr. Polyev's. I have a motion I'd like to introduce, Mr. Chair. I'm going to read that now. That the committee hold pre-budget consultations for the 2022 budget, and that A, it commence hearing from witnesses the week of January 31st, 2021. B, the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister and departmental officials be invited to appear before the committee. C, each party submit a prioritized witness list no later than 6 p.m. on Friday, January 21st, 2022. And D, that all submissions for the 2022 pre-budget consultations be published on the digital binder site of the committee. And I'm sending a copy to the chair for distribution. I so move, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Yes, and to the clerk, please, so that the clerk can distribute, Mr. Beach.
To the clerk.
Yeah.
If I could, just a quick point of clarification on that. I'm confident it was just an error, but I think he said January 31st, 2021, and I'm sure he meant 2022, but
Mr.
Yeah.
My first timing error coming into the new year. Thank you, Mr. Blakey.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Blakey, and for that change. And now open for discussion. Yeah, Mr. Polyev.
First of all, when will this motion be distributed?
So the clerk, have you received it? No. So Mr. Beach, if you can please share the motion so all members can.
Is the motion considered moved, given that we don't have copies of it? Is the motion?
It is considered moved, yes.
And so where is it?
We are receiving it. And if it could be sent to then all members, clerk. She needs to. Ms. Zarowitz, if you could just check your mic, just to see everything is in order.
Ms. Darowitz, we can't hear you. So we will have someone call you from our IT side. Can you hear me? Yes? You said okay, I saw that. Ms. Darowitz, are you able to unmute yourself? We see that your mute button is on. Yeah, still not working. Okay. Yeah, we'll have someone call you.
Yeah. Just give Mr. Beach a moment. I think he's changing the date.
It looks like he wasn't ready to speak yet.
He had his hand up.
We don't have the motion.
The
What's the
motion
problem here?
has been circulated. I'm just trying to get all the Liberal members to have a copy as well, but everybody should have it. The critics have it in their P9 if they can distribute to all the members that are on the table. I don't have a view of everybody that's around the table at the moment, so I send it to all the critics.
Mr. Beach, did you get it? Did you send it to the
Send it to the
clerk?
clerk.
All we need is the clerk to
It sends-
receive it
looks
and
like
let the
he-
clerk distribute it. But
He's got a whole department supporting him here.
have you received it?
I think ours. Hello?
Yes, Ms. Zarowitz. Yep, we can hear you now.
I'm sorry to interrupt. But I'm back.
Peter,
Yes.
sorry, Chair, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just sending it also to the other members. I believe it's in your inbox. Do you mind just forwarding it over to the clerk?
You have it? Okay. All right. Okay. Gabriel, thank you. Merci.
Can I
You're
get
like
a,
Santa Claus,
Can I please
Gabriel.
get a
You
written
deliver.
copy of that?
Sure. Do you want to speak to the motion, Terry?
You had already given me the
everybody-
floor, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
You had actually given me the floor, and I was asking to have a copy of the motion so I could address it.
Okay, you're getting the motion. Mr. Polyev, have you received it? Mr. Polyev? Would you like to hear from Mr. Beach about the motion?
When he's back on the speaking list, that would be great, but still don't have a copy of the motion.
I believe it's in your P9, sir.
I do not use that, so.
Oh. Okay. Do you have Mr. Polyev's email? He doesn't use P9. He uses something else.
I don't have his.
Yeah. I don't know what. But P8?
I'd be
All right.
happy if
So,
Peter could propose a solution.
all right, I do have a copy,
Thank you.
and we have provided the copy of, I think my motion goes quite well with this motion, in that it addresses the problem that the chair caused at the last meeting, and makes sure that it doesn't happen at future meetings. So my motion would can come as an amendment to this, and it would read that during questioning of witnesses of all future hearings, the chair of the committee apply the following rule: that the time to respond to each question not exceed the time taken to ask it, unless with the permission of the member who has the floor. And that we can call that the Easter rule, because this was how Wayne Easter, the previous Liberal chair, ran the committee. And of course, Liberals have have raved about how successful the previous Parliament was in responding to COVID. Well, all of the COVID decisions had to come through the Finance Committee. So in those extraordinary times, we were, as a committee, though I don't agree with all the policy decisions made, there is no doubt that
Zarowitz, point of order.
I believe, Mr. Chair, this might be a separate motion, although I do find it wonderful that Mr. Polyev, really cherishes our former chair.
Yeah. Is this an
it's amendment.
Proposing? It's an amendment to the motion.
It's an amendment.
It's an amendment to the motion, Mr. Polyev.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and it does amend this motion, but it also amends the committee's rules so that for all future hearings, this would be the rule, and so it would behoove the committee to get back to the normal course of business and exchanges in committee by adopting this amendment, and that would allow us to move forward with a programming motion to get budget consultations going. And it's a very small thing, obviously, just going back to the way we did it in the last Parliament, and that should be very uncontroversial. And of course, it is in order because committees are their own masters and they can make the rules how they like to. So I think that the adoption of this amendment could result in expeditious adoption of other committee business, and we can then all raise a glass of eggnog and celebrate the forthcoming Christmas period.
Mr. Polyev, if you can send that to the clerk for distribution, please. And now I've got on the list, Sophie, were you? I have Sophie, I've got Julie, and then I've got Yvonne.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a clarification on this motion. Is that when we ask a question and the question is brief but required a longer explanation, that the witness cannot use more time answering than the question we use, the time we use to ask the question?
So the answer to that question is in the final sentence, the final clause, which is unless with the permission of the member who has the floor. So if you ask a short question, then you could, the witness says, look, I'd love to give you more information, I just don't have enough time, then you could say, sure, please, help yourself, take your time. But it does create an egality of time, so that the witness and the questioner get the same amount of time in each block, and we don't have a 15-second question followed up by a 3-minute unrelated answer.
I've got can I call you guys by your first names? I'm just looking. Is that all right? Okay. So I've got Julie, Yvonne, Jake, and then Gabrielle.
Mr. Chair, no, I want you to call me Ms. Zarowitz.
Okay, Ms. Zarowitz, yes.
No, I'm totally kidding. You can call me Julie. Anyways, I do find it admirable, Mr. Polyev's admiration for our former chair. And Mr. Chair, I don't recall the rule that Mr. Polyev is saying existed the last time around in Finance Committee. I think that if I recall correctly, Mr. Easter did try to manage the time. So he did try to keep it more or less in the same time frame. But I think similar to what Ms. Chattel was kind of alluding to, which is sometimes an answer takes a little bit longer than a question. And so I think that overall, the former chair tried to be very fair and very balanced. And if anything, I think he actually tried to give a little extra time, particularly to our opposition members. But I don't believe that we ever had a rule in place that formalized that if you asked a 2-second question, you have to give a 2-second answer. And quite honestly, I do think it would be detrimental to us actually hearing some of the more complete answers that I think we may need to hear in order to have proper deliberations and make proper decisions and recommendations on this committee. So while I appreciate Mr. Polyev's concern, I do think that there's always been an element of fairness around how long people speak. I do think there is consideration in general around the responses, and so I think I'll leave it at that. But I would not be in favor of this motion. I think it would be negative in terms of us being able to hear proper and full answers, and be able to debate and make proper recommendations, as I've already said. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Julie. I've got Yvonne, Jake, Gabriel, Daniel, Adam. Yvonne?
Thanks very much, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Thanks very much, Chair. So, I don't agree with Mr. Polyev's amendment. I think there's a couple things I want to say. First thing is that I don't think this would be fair to the witnesses. Some of the questions can be answered in the same time as the question is asked, but many of them cannot. And I think in general, we know that there are exceptions, but in general, it takes less time to ask a question than it does take to answer it, especially if it's a question that is not doesn't require a yes or no answer. So I don't think this would be fair to the witnesses. I also don't think it'd be fair to the other members because they wouldn't get to hear the answers. And I don't think it'd be fair to members of the public who are trying to watch and follow. The second thing is that I think, and this is a point of clarification, but for Mr. Polyev, but would this also mean that witnesses are guaranteed an equal amount of time as the member to speak? So for example, if a member spoke for 2.5 minutes, would that guarantee the witness 2.5 minutes of response time? Or if the member spoke for 4 minutes, would it guarantee the witness 4 members of response, an equal amount of response time? At the very least, I would think if that's what Mr. Polyev is putting forward something that's balanced, then balance or equality in terms of time would require that be guaranteed to the witness as well. And I'm not sure if members in this committee would be comfortable with that. So in truth, what Mr. Polyev is proposing, unless we make that change, would not be balanced and not be fair. But once again, I'm opposed to the amendment. I think it's not fair to ask a witness to answer a question, some questions that are asked within 5 seconds, when sometimes it requires a 20 or 30 second answer. And I don't think it would advance the work of the committee.
Okay. Jake?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the amendment because I found out personally here on the committee that when you ask a question as simple as how much does it cost to administer the program, when a witness goes on for 2 minutes and doesn't answer the question after 2 minutes, what happens to the MPs around this table is we spend all that time coming up with a good question that the Canadian public deserve an answer for. But yet, because a witness either doesn't know the answer or doesn't want to provide it, whichever reason it may be, we lose our ability to ask more questions because of the time they take to ramble. So I think this amendment is really sufficient because I've sat on a number of committees in my life, and I've always found that when the chair interferes with the proceeding too much. I used to chair the Climate and Environmental Stewardship Committee in New Brunswick, provincially. I would never get involved. I'd only shut down the debate if it got out of hand, but I would never intervene. I wanted people on the committee to have the back and forth. I wanted the witnesses to have the freedom to answer a question. But this amendment is really sufficient because I can tell you, Mr. Chair, the people of Miramichi Grand Lake, they want these questions asked. But more importantly, they want the answer. And if a witness comes in, and they should know the answer, everybody in the Canadian public knows it, and if I ask a 30-second question and they take 2 minutes and don't provide an answer, that takes 2 more minutes away from me. And around this table, we're actually restricted. We're restricted to the time limits upon us, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever it is. You'd like to ask a number of questions in that time frame. I get it if they can't provide an answer. They just should say, I don't know the answer. And then I can ask another question, rather than speaking for 5 minutes and ruining a member of Parliament's opportunity to ask an important question as a follow-up. And I think this amendment put forward by Mr. Polyev really keeps the witnesses in check and keeps them accountable as well, and it allows all the members of the House that are on this committee to ask more questions, and the more the better. Thank you. That's why I support it.
Thanks, Jake. Gabriel, Daniel, Adam.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleague Pierre Polievre is quite right. Before the elections, when Wayne Easter was the chair, that was the rule, which is basically the same one used in the Committee of the Whole. When the question was raised a few meetings ago, said that generally there should be some equivalence between the question time and the time given for the answer. So my colleague wanted to formalize that as it is formalized in the Committee of the Whole. I do have a question for him, and I will continue to give my views. In answer to Mr. Baker, to Yvonne Baker, Wayne's procedure was that when the chair saw that the witness would not have a time equivalent to the time the question took to answer, he would interrupt the member asking the question to provide the witness with an equivalent amount of time. This is how the committee did operate, and I do agree with this principle because it worked well. My question for my colleague, Mr. Pierre Polievre, is this. As far as I know, the way Wayne Easter applied the rule, well, he used it particularly when there were ministers, senior officials. For example, when it was witnesses from the general public or organizations we had asked for, that rule was less stringently applied. So regardless of what we end up adopting here, I wanted to point out that it was particularly important to have this rule when we see officials, senior officials, and members of government. When we have witnesses who are less accustomed to Parliament, it is less important to be stringent about this rule. What does my colleague who put forward the amendment think about that?
Daniel, Adam, Pierre, Greg.
Thank you very much. So I don't think it's any surprise for, I think everybody knows, I wasn't on the committee in the last Parliament, but I do have it on good authority from my colleague Peter Julian, who was on the committee. Seems to recall that there was a serious effort and successful effort by the chair to try and keep the answers to questions roughly proportionate to the length that it takes to pose the question. I don't think that Mr. Baker has to worry too much in terms of, you know, whether this works or doesn't work. It works and is a normal practice in Committee of the Whole and the examination of the estimates. We did it last week, I think it was. This has been a week where a lot of things have kind of blended together. If it wasn't last week, it was the week before, right around December 9th, I think. So I don't think anybody would say that things kind of fell apart there. And I do also recognize in Mr. Polievre's motion that there is the possibility for a member of Parliament to, you know, cede more of their time. It doesn't mean that the witness gets another 6 minutes on top of the 6 minutes allocated, just as in the Committee of Whole, when you have 15 minutes and you decide to use it all for question and answer, it doesn't magically become a 30-minute period. It just means that your 15 minutes are divided more proportionally between the MP and, in that case, the minister, but here it would be the witness. So I think this is reasonable. I think it would be a good practice. I also know I've sat on a lot of committees where sometimes the most kind of heated and conflictual moments come when there is a feeling that a witness is using all of the time, maybe not speaking directly to the issue that the member is interested in. Of course, we only have so much time. And so you will see members try and intervene in order to get the witness back on track, as it were, or to speak directly to the issues that are of interest to the member and that they want to use their time to discuss. And so one of the potential virtues of enshrining a rule like this more formally would be to avoid those situations where things are getting a little more heated and a little more intense. I think that could help bring the temperature down a little bit by giving the MP more of a clear sense of how they can manage their own time at committee instead of having to jockey with the witness in order to try and get that time management down. So I think it could have a salutary effect on the proceedings of the committee to eliminate that kind of requirement for members who want to see their time used in a particular way to have to compete with a witness. Of course, it's not always like that, but there are cases where it is like that. I believe we've already seen some of that at this committee and this Parliament, and so I think this is a good way to try and avoid the worst instances of that. I'm happy to speak to the main motion too. I think there is a little bit of awkwardness. We are clearly talking about two separate kinds of issues, so would have been happy to just see them presented separately. But in any event, I think if everyone, if we want to dispose with this relatively quickly, I'm okay for this one to put the two together. If we're pretty confident that both are going to pass, then we may as well pass them together and be efficient, because I think efficiency is a virtue for all members of this committee. We're going to probably talk a lot about efficiency. We may as well lead by example. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Adam, Pierre, Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be relatively brief. This is about how we want to set our meetings and run them efficiently. I think it is a good practice and will enforce some discipline. I think we run the risk of the committee seemingly to end up in a dysfunctional nature where what will occur is a bunch of speeches every time there is witness testimony, and whether that's because it's a fellow member of Parliament or colleague as a witness, or others who maybe feel a little bit unsettled because they don't have an answer at the tip of their hands. This will force some discipline. I think it's, frankly, it's quite reasonable, and a member's time with a witness is the member's choice with which how they choose to use their 5 minutes. The member may like to make some opening remarks and show some statistics to set the stage for some questions. I think that's incredibly reasonable as well. I don't think it means then that the witness should have that long in terms of replying just because there was a setup. I think the question itself should be specific. We will get far better answers from witnesses. The meetings will run crisper, more efficiently, and I think we'll all find ourselves a little bit more informed and have a better level of discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Pierre?
Yes, so a number of questions have come forward. Mr. Baker asked a question. I think Gabrielle gave a good answer. That yes, the principle is that the witness does get a long answer, a very long answer, if they get a very long question. And that actually kind of forces a discipline on the member not to ramble, which politicians, occasionally even myself included, have a tendency to do. So it disciplines us to get to our question, and but I would actually go a little further than even Gabrielle said. The witness will in the end get more time than the members because the witness has an opening statement. And that is the moment at which the witness is invited to really elaborate and build out the concepts and ideas. They usually have 10 minutes, which is a very long time to speak. I'm not saying this is the perfect answer. I think that it is the worst answer except for all the others, as Churchill said about democracy. But, Mr. Chair, you rightly pointed out the other day that the interruptions where people are speaking over each other are hard for the interpreters, they're hard for everybody. This is actually a solution for that. Because if I know that I've asked a 30-second question, I'm going to get a 30-second answer, I don't have to barge in to reclaim my time. The reason why members get anxious to barge back in is because they'll get 5 minutes. And if the witnesses start to give a speech, they know that they're not going to get very many questions in. The chair's job actually gets very easy because you literally just look at the clock and say, you asked a 23-second question, there's going to be a 23-second answer, and there really doesn't leave any room for anyone on the committee to feel shortchanged because we're just dealing with the mathematics of time. And as for the occasion Mr. Baker, Mr. Chantel raised, where a member asks a question in 3 seconds that clearly cannot be answered, that will be evident to everyone in the room and be self-defeating. So if someone says, give me the history since the book of Genesis, start now. Well, I mean, everybody's going to say, that's a ridiculous challenge, and the member is going to get nowhere and no sympathy for getting a non-answer. But if the member says, look, how much money is there in the Canada Pension Fund? That's really we're looking for a number. At that point, it doesn't require a speech. And so this, I think, is the best system we can come up with in order to regulate the very limited amount of time we have for these conversations. And as for Mr. Saint-Marie's other point, I do think Wayne was a little bit more generous with non-ministers and officials. If there were people who are not professional at testifying, they were given a little bit more leeway. And I think that no one would fault the chair if he were to do the same when we have witnesses that are not members of the executive branch or of the offices of Parliament. So that's the best I can do, I think, in responding to the questions and concerns.
Thanks, Pierre. I have Greg and then Sophie.
Monsieur Président.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be very brief and as efficient as I can be, as my friend said, but I agree with both points that were raised by Mr. Saint-Marie and Mr. Blakey.
Of the previous committee I was on, and I don't know why it's being contested here at all, because it does make for better meetings that run much more smoothly. That being said, I yield.
Okay, Greg, thanks. I've got Sophie, then Terry, and then Yvonne.
Thank you. If we are going ahead with this motion, I like Gabrielle's suggestion that it should be witnesses that are used and regularly invited. So I don't know how we can phrase that, but I tentatively say that are regularly invited to this committee, or senior official, minister, maybe senior official and ministers. And I don't want to be part of a committee where the chair has to, look at how, 30 seconds and then 30 seconds. I think it would be unfair to put a burden. So I would change the last sentence, and instead of saying unless the permission, I would say when the member who has the floor asks for a short reply. So that would seem to be more, if you ask for a short reply, if you have a short question, you could say to the witness, can you answer in short? And then the chair will know that this is what's going on and will then compute the time. But for myself, when we invite witnesses, I want to hear what they have to say. And I don't want because I ask a 30-second answer, to put a burden on the chair to interrupt the witness when I want a long answer, because they're there to provide their expertise. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Sophie. Terry, Yvonne, Julie. I think I've got that in.
I'm not sure if there was an amendment necessarily moved there, but I wanted to suggest a friendly amendment to Pierre, and I'm only suggesting it as a friendly amendment. And if he doesn't accept it as a friendly amendment, then that's fine. We can move on. Just to give some flexibility, given the way that the amendment is worded, I would suggest in the last after the colon, where it says that the time to respond to each question not exceed the time taken to ask it. I mean, there might be a circumstance where it is obvious to the chair or to anyone that somebody is closing their sentence or just coming to the end and might not be within that couple of second window, that we add the term approximately, so that the time to respond to each question not exceed the approximate time taken to ask it, just to give that flexibility. And again, I'm not trying to do anything to change the basic nature of what the mover is trying to accomplish. I just think it probably more accurately reflects how the committee is previously run.
Okay, Terry, I've got Yvonne and then Julie. Yep. Mr. Polyev, would you like to speak to that, Mr. Polyev, in terms of the friendly amendment?
It would not be a friendly amendment.
Okay, and so we've got, that was Terry, we got Yvonne, and then Julie. No, I
Thank
don't.
you.
Now, Julie.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Mr.
Yvonne's hand
Thank you,
was up.
Mr.
Sorry, Julie. Yeah.
That's no problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't mind hearing from the clerk. Is Mr. Polyev's amendment in order?
It is in order, Ms. Zarowitz.
It is in order.
Julie. Yeah.
Okay. And so, okay.
See any Yvonne? Yes. Do you have your hand up?
I'll pass it back to Yvonne, and maybe I'll get back.
Okay, because you know what, Julie and Yvonne, or anybody that's on the screen, I go by the clerk has instructed me that we go in order of how I see the hands as they come up on the screen. So that's kind of what I'm going by. So I've got Yvonne now.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So just a couple of thoughts. One is I haven't seen this rule applied on the committees that I've served on, sort of environment and defense, for example, in the last Parliament. But I do think a couple of things are important. I mean, I think one is that, and maybe Mr. Polyev, you support this. I just want to be sure I understand that there is a little bit of discretion. So if you ask for a dissertation on inflation, for example, and you do that in 3 seconds, that the witness has some time, that some discretion is given to the chair, or that some mechanism is in place to ensure that we treat witnesses appropriately and respectfully, and we get answers to those questions that you've indicated you want answers to. So that's one point of clarification I would ask to Mr. Polyev and the other members of the committee to see if they agree. And the second point was, I just wanted to make sure we're clear that je voulais simplement revenir sur ce que
I just wanted to come back to what Gabriel was saying about the time given for witnesses. Well, I wanted to clarify something. We all agree that witnesses will have the same amount of time in all as the member, if they wish it. If a member speaks, well, if they have 6 minutes, well, let's say 5 minutes, and the member has spoken for 2.5, to leave 2.5 for the witnesses to answer, the chair will interrupt the member so that the witness can have equal time to answer. I just want to understand clearly how this will work and see how Mr. Poilievre says works with Gabriel.
Julie, you're on mute.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chair. I could barely hear you. Okay, thank you. It's so hard to be here while you guys are all there, just for the record. I just want to let you know. So anyways, I would like to formally move what my colleague, Mr. Beach, had proposed, that we add the words approximately equal time, and that applies to ministers and government officials. So I don't have the amendment that Mr. Polyev had suggested, so I'm not able to actually read that out properly to you because I don't have his thing. But I want to add the word approximately, and I would like it to apply to ministers and government officials. And I would like to formally move that, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Julie. I do have Daniel, Adam, and then Pierre.
And can I talk to that, Mr. Chair, or does that have to go to the
Oh, I thought you had spoken to it, but go ahead, Julie. Yes.
So I formally moved it. It's just, I think that, look, this is a good discussion. Look, I think Mr. Blakey had sort of mentioned something similar to what I had said, where Wayne very much tried to keep things a very even keel. To those members who had mentioned that, for those that were not government officials or ministers, the former chair did provide extra time, and in most circumstances and time did allow witnesses to finish what they had to say, and really try to be very balanced with the time for all the different sides and all the different parties. I think that my two amendments, so the adding of the approximately and the adding of the ministers and government officials, I think addresses a number of the issues that have been raised in our conversation over the last 20 minutes. And I do hope that it is adopted by the committee so that we could move on to maybe discussing the pre-budget consultation aspects of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Daniel, Adam, Pierre.
Thanks. Alas, I fear my intervention may have come too late as we now have a sub-amendment on the floor. But I did want to offer that in the Procedure and Practice Manual of the House of Commons, under Committees of the Whole and other uses of Committee of the Whole, I don't have the pagination because I'm on my phone, Mr. Chair. They do say that the House frequently adopts special orders setting additional conditions for debate, such as rules ensuring that the answer by the Minister or Parliamentary Secretary does not exceed the time taken for the question. So, I think that's the language, which I think is pretty clear. I think the problem with the language of approximate, well, I think that's largely what the chair will end up doing, and I think there's some little bit of discretion in the Committee of the Whole to that effect. I think the problem is that it does make your job a lot more difficult in that if part of the idea is to set a clear rule that makes it clear how you're to proceed, so if there is a disagreement about the extent to which that's happening appropriately, you can lean on the rule, and if you have to get very strict with the clock, then you can. I think we would all hope that things will proceed in a way where people are satisfied that it's roughly similar in terms of time and won't be challenging you on that too often. But in the event that there is a challenge, you want the rule to be clear enough that you have firm guidance. If it's not, then I fear we will descend into argument about the meaning of approximate and your conduct as chair and whether it's acceptable to the committee or not. So, I mean, there's a little bit of what I think people sometimes call future tripping by my Liberal colleagues about like how the rule will happen in practice, and I hear that, right? And I think until we get a little bit of experience with it, and people have a sense of what to expect, that's likely to happen. But I like having a little bit clearer wording. I'm open to the idea that we would, and I think what we're hearing is that the expectation is that this would more likely happen with ministers and with departmental officials than outside witnesses. But again, I mean, I think part of it is to set the rule. If the committee feels like things are proceeding well, and even if a witness is taking a little longer, but the MP's not objecting, which after all is more or less in the motion that Monsieur Polyev has proposed in the first place, then I don't think this is going to come up. It's going to come up in hard cases where there's friction, and at that point, I think you do want a clear rule. So I really think that the initial wording is, I do think it's adequate. I think we need a bit of experience with it in order to build a bit of trust and to have people feel good about how it's going to be implemented. And if we need to revisit because it is falling apart, then we can do that. But I think trying to craft something right now that's going to speak to all potential cases of breakdown is going to be difficult. I think the initial wording really does give you the tools that you need, Mr. Chair, in order to implement what I think would be a clear intention of the committee if it were to pass. And with a little more experience, in the event that it's not working, we could hammer out a compromise. So I'm still inclined just to support the original, the wording of the original amendment.
Thanks, Daniel. Adam, and then Pierre. I'm not sure if anybody else was on the list. Adam, you were on the list? Oh, Ms. Zarowitz after that. Yeah, Adam, Pierre, Julie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will do some long soul searching this holiday. I find myself agreeing very much with my NDP colleague this last, the 10th meeting. This is, we have a very good track record. I just note the time for the record, 10 after 5. And I think we could dispense with much of the discussion. The main motion, at least, seems relatively reasonable. I think the amendment by Mr. Polyev seems very reasonable. And if members wish to yield more of their time to witnesses, that is completely within their right. But I think for all the reasons mentioned by my colleague, Mr. Blakey, This is, it would be very nice and in the Christmas spirit or holiday spirit, if you will, that and in cooperation that we dispense with this relatively quickly. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Pierre, Julie. And that's all I see right now. Pierre, and then Julie.
I couldn't agree more with Adam. And the word approximately is too approximate, to be clear. And I think we're going to end up, as our friend Mr. Blakey said, debating the meaning of that adverb rather than debating the substance before committee on a given day. So in the House during committees of the whole, it's actually very sharp. It is 3-second question, 3-second answer, 3-minute question, 3-minute answer, and somehow committees of the whole actually work quite well. They've been very well served by them, so I think we can just apply the same rule. And remember, members can offer more time. They can say, unless actually I think this is going to require take a longer time. The other thing that can happen is if a member of the government side believes that a minister has not had enough time to answer an opposition question, they can always say, I note you had more to say, Minister. Please take some of my time to elaborate on the answer that you gave to the opposition. So there are a lot of opportunities to maneuver around the strictures of this, and I think we should adopt it.
Thank you, Pierre. Julie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to Mr. Poilievre's most recent comments, Finance Committee is not similar to Committee of the Whole. So I do want to point that out. I also want to point out that part of my amendment to the sub-amendment was to address, something that Mr. Saint-Marie had mentioned. And I will just read out my amendment to the sub-amendment, Mr. Chair, if that's okay, because I think we're coming close to a vote. That during questioning of witnesses, hold on for a second, I'm very sorry. That during questioning of witnesses at all future hearings, the chair of the committee apply the following rule, that the time to respond to each question not exceed the approximate time taken to ask it, unless with the permission of the member who has the floor, and that this rule applied to ministers and senior officials.
Thank you, Julie. And now we have Daniel and then Yvonne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to ask if you might, I think we've had a pretty good sampling of opinions around the table. I was going to ask if you might test the committee for unanimous consent at this point to consider the sub-amendment defeated on division, the amendment passed on division, and the main motion as amended passed on division.
Can you just repeat that? There was a lot.
So the sub-amendment, which is Ms. Zarowitz's
Yes.
motion, would be considered defeated on division.
Yes.
The amendment would be considered passed on division, and the main motion would be considered passed on division.
Yeah.
The main motion as amended.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wonder if you might test the committee. I respect Mr. Baker may want to talk some more, and other members may want to talk some more. I'm not trying to stop anyone from saying more. I'm just saying if you do test the committee and people are happy with that, then we could conclude the debate on all three of these items efficiently.
Well, thanks, Daniel. I'll just I will let Mr. Baker speak, but just before, what I've been hearing is that members' time is precious, and you only have so much time on committee. You're looking to make the committee as efficient and effective as possible. You want fairness and balance on the committee. And you're looking for proportionate answers and, within kind of the right timings. So, and you're looking for the chair to be able to hold to that. I'd also like to know, just what I'm hearing from everybody is how prescriptive you want me to be. Is it like, okay, I'm clocking this at 10 seconds and then it's 10 seconds. Like that's so prescriptive. And it would be very, very challenging and difficult for the chair to cut people off and also to, but you're looking for an answer that gets to the point within reason, within that time. Is
No.
that
No.
is
no. The reason we're writing it down, Chair, is because basically every word you used was a subjective one. You know, like you can say the word fairness or approximately or reasonable, and if we all agreed on the meaning of all those words, we probably wouldn't even need to have political parties because we'd all agree on everything. So the reason why we're trying to lay down specific rules here is so that we get equal time. And this is done by other chairs. It was done by Mr. Easter. It's a little awkward the first time you try it, kind of like riding a bicycle, but it gets very natural after that. And Mr. Easter, at times, he would literally interrupt mid-word, not mid-sentence, mid-word. And it was fine. The witness very quickly got to understand, and these were ministers, these were top officials testifying on $100 billion emergency programs. They got to understand that they had approximately 15 seconds to get the information out, and they got the information out. So it is a firm discipline. It is not a general sentiment, because if we leave it to general sentiment, we end up with the kinds of bickering that broke out at the last meeting.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Polyev. You know, what I will do, I will commit to Mr. Polyev, to members here, that I will go back and look at the recordings and look at some of those timings in terms of what, you know, the question and answer and how Mr. Easter was conducting those meetings and kind of what were the exchanges and how much time. And I would like to, maybe with the clerk's help, we can get some of those timings and bring those also back to the committee, just so everybody's aware of what was happening, you know, prior. I've sat on international trade, on foreign affairs. I chaired a subcommittee on human rights. And so the way that what I've learned and how I've conducted those meetings are the same as what would happen on those committees. So I'm just being open with the members. I'm going to go to Yvonne before maybe we get to conclude this. Yvonne, and then we'll look to see if we go to a vote. Or on
Chair.
division, as Mr. Daniel has requested.
Thanks, Chair. So I just wanted to circle back. Je voulais simplement revérifier.
I just wanted to come back to committee members and double check. Mr. Blakey was talking about the importance of being clear. I agree that clarity is very important. That is what Mr. Blakey is seeking. That is his goal in supporting the motion. But I would like a clarification to see for myself how things will work in committee. If a member speaks for over half of the time allocated for that question and that witness, for example, if I start talking, I have 5 minutes in all. I speak for 2.5. Well, to make sure that the witness has equal time, the chair would have to interrupt me to give the remaining 2.5 minutes to the witness. Have I properly understood our intent as a committee? Is that how we're going to operate? I just want to be clear on it, because there's no point in having a debate after we've voted. I want to be clear on things now, and I'd appreciate someone doing that for me.
Yes, Monsieur Gabriel.
Oui, merci. Donc, pour Yvan.
Thank you. Yes, to Yvon. This is how it worked. When we were questioning a witness and we had 5 minutes, he would interrupt us after 2.5 minutes, and the witness would have the remaining 2.5 minutes to answer. However, the member can always comment instead of asking a question. For example, I have sometimes taken the time I had to talk about what mattered to us rather than questioning a witness. But when questioning a witness, yes, we would be cut off by the chair after 2.5 minutes so that the rest of the time could go to the witness.
Okay, thank you, Gabriel. I see. Oh, yes, Daniel.
Et pour moi, comme dans le committee of the whole,
in my view, just like in committee of the whole, in my experience, if there's only a little time remaining, the member could use almost all the remaining time to make a comment if the member wishes. And if the member has finished with a question, then the chair would say, we have only a few seconds left, so a brief answer, please, because basically the member has decided to use the time to make a comment rather than seek an answer, and it is clear that he or she is not really seeking an answer, but has decided to make a comment. That is how things work in Committee of the Whole. So I think there are clear precedents, substantive and substantial precedents, to show how this could work.
Other hands? Oh, yes, I've got Mr. Beach. And just let me say, having sat in the Ontario legislature, they actually have clocks on committee and actually in the chamber. So, and I don't know if members would like to try something like that, but where the clock runs, it runs right out, like you have your 6 minutes, you'll see the clock, and as soon as it strikes 6, it's done. So rather than the chair having to try to find the end to the answer or to cut somebody off, we could try something like that. I'd be open to bringing that to our committee if members are open to that. Yeah, I've got Mr. Beach.
I thought our colleague from the NDP had a very reasonable solution, and I would like to see if we were going to test his solution.
Okay, this is all in the Christmas spirit, right? Yeah, great. Okay, is that it? Okay, I think we've heard from everybody. So, Clerk, what we are voting now on is it on the sub amendment to the amendment?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry,
or
yes,
Mr. Chair.
yes.
I was referring to the NDP's suggestion on unanimous consent, given division on the sub amendment, and then adopting the entire. Well, actually, you know what? I would suggest my colleague Daniel, who brought this up in the first place, if he could repeat it so all members understand it, perhaps we could proceed that way.
That would be excellent. Yes, Daniel,
Chair,
please.
So my proposal was to consider Ms. Zarowitz's sub-amendment defeated on division, Mr. Poilievre's amendment passed on division, and the main motion as amended. So this would be Mr. Beach's motion as amended, passed on division. And if that's amenable to everyone on the committee, I don't see that we need anything further than a yes.
Mr. Beach, is that clear to you? Is that?
That sounds great.
Okay. Okay, so clerk. Okay, so to the committee, that the sub-amendment would be defeated on division, the amendment would be passed on division, and the main motion would be passed on division. As amended, yes. Okay, carried. There we go. Okay.
Merry Christmas.
Yep. Well, I was just about to do that, but then Gabrielle, he's going to bring us some more Christmas cheer, and as we go into the new year. Yeah.
Oui, eh bien, oui, j'en profite pour vous souhaiter de...
Well, I'd like to take the opportunity to wish you all a happy holiday, but I do have a question for the clerk. In previous committees, we had the custom of voting on a motion, and I don't have the exact formulation in order to recover all documents from pre-budget consultations submitted before previous elections so that we could have access to them. Could the clerk provide the wording for that motion, and then I will move it. Thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie. That is actually in Mr. Beach's motion already. Thank you.
So, yeah, first I just want to wish all of you and your families a healthy, safe, happy Christmas season, New Year, and holidays, and all the best to everyone. Okay, thank you very much, and look to adjourn. Sure.